Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and today we're going to be talking about this situation, this dispute between Nintendo and Bloomberg. So over the last couple years, there have been these ongoing rumors about a 4K capable Nintendo Switch, a Switch Pro, and Bloomberg has put out multiple reports suggesting this would eventually happen. And recently we got the announcement of Switch OLED, and before Switch OLED was announced, there was a lot of reports, including Bloomberg, suggesting that it would be a 4K capable device. That is not the case. But even more recently, even though we thought that maybe the 4K Switch Pro rumors would finally die down, Bloomberg put out another report saying they had 11 developers that had 4K development kits for the Nintendo Switch, suggesting that Switch Pro is real. Nintendo finally came out and put out their own official tweets directed at Bloomberg, claiming that their report is inaccurate or false. So now Nintendo and Bloomberg are at odds here. Someone seems to be lying, not telling the truth. What's going on? Who is telling the truth? Are they both lying? Are they both telling the truth? Is there some sort of common ground here? What is it? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Now, before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So we already know that Bloomberg is suggesting that 11 developers they know of have 4K development kits for Nintendo Switch, suggesting a Switch Pro that would back up all their previous reports about a Switch Pro. Well, Nintendo came out and said that the report is false. This is exactly what they said. A news report on September 30th, 2021, JST, falsely claims that Nintendo is supplying tools to drive game development for a Nintendo Switch with 4K support. To ensure correct understanding among our investors and customers, we want to clarify that this report is not true. We also want to restate, as we announced in July, we have no plans for any new model other than Nintendo Switch OLED model, which will launch on October 8th, 2021. So this is very fascinating for a few different reasons. One, we're seeing Nintendo kinda coming at Bloomberg here. This is a little bit of a drama. It's kind of exciting, I would say, because they're basically telling Bloomberg, no, you're wrong, your credibility should just not be there because this is not true. And that's a big deal for Bloomberg because Bloomberg reports things. Their credibility is very important to them because if their integrity, if their truthness of their articles is under question, well, then they're less valuable as a news source. So this is a big deal. But then at the same time, for Bloomberg, because they're saying these things about a 4K Nintendo Switch, that impacts Nintendo because if it's true, or if people at least believe it's true, it can impact their sales and their relationship with their investors because they're saying that, no, this is not true. They're saying this directly to their investors, not just some PR guy talking to the public. So in general, you can't really lie to your investors. You have to be honest with them. But this can create issues because one, there's that relationship that they should be entirely honest with, but also this can impact sales. If people know that a 4K Switch is coming, they may not want to buy a Switch OLED. So there's these two different sort of sides here, these two different motives, and they're both sort of suggesting that the other is misleading in some way. So what's the truth here? Is Bloomberg lying? Is Nintendo lying? Is Bloomberg simply inaccurate with their information? Have they been misled? Is Nintendo trying to tell the truth but not tell the truth? Are they trying to, maybe put one over on us but still be honest at the same time? Is there some sort of gray area here where both can be truthful or maybe both can be lying? Potentially. I think there's a few different ways this can kind of go down. But what makes things even more interesting is that we have gotten another report from Zynga, one of the 11 said developers, and they've come out and officially stated that there is no 4K development kits, at least according to Zynga, they do not have one. So that would suggest that Bloomberg's report is not true. Of course, people are now saying that Zynga is lying and Nintendo put them up to it. There's no proof of that. But what makes things even more interesting, on September 30th, a patent came out to the public that's from Nintendo, and it's all about AI upscaling. What is that? It's basically a form of DLSS, which stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling, which, to make it simple, basically it's some sort of artificial intelligence that developers are starting to work on that will allow for a lower resolution in a game to use that AI to upscale itself to a much higher resolution with far less processing power. So you can take something, say like a 720p, and upscale it potentially all the way up to 4K or something like that, a much higher resolution with minimal processing power. And we're not talking about like just straight up upscaling, but actually like showing the image as it would actually look in that resolution or something close to it. So this is actually a big deal because for weaker systems like the Nintendo Switch, if they were to use some sort of technology like this, you can get a lot more oomph there. You can show off much more beautiful looking games with far less processing power. So that's a big deal. It would make a big difference for a potential Switch Pro, which is why a lot of people are excited about these rumors, because the idea has been that we'll get a 4K capable Switch through the means of DLSS or whatever Nintendo's apparently working on based off this patent. So then, does this patent prove that Nintendo is lying? And they're lying even to their investors, and Bloomberg is 100% correct? I don't think so. I think the truth is probably still somewhere in the middle, as it usually is. I think we're looking at a situation where, yes, Bloomberg has heard some things. I don't think Bloomberg is straight up lying. I think they've heard some things and they've put out a report. But I also feel like maybe they feel the need to put out additional reports to sort of hold claim to their credibility here. Because they've been building up this narrative over the last couple years that Nintendo was working on a 4K capable Switch and that it would come out very soon. And shortly before E3, there was this big talk about Switch Pro finally being revealed. There was even conversations that would be shown off right before E3 because developers would be showcasing the capabilities of this system at E3. That did not happen. However, shortly after E3, Nintendo did reveal Switch OLED, which to some extent was what was described in previous reports by Bloomberg and other venues. So there is truth to those reports, but the one big thing that was missing was the 4K capabilities. So since then, a lot of people have come to doubt the legitimacy of the Switch Pro rumors, and I've been one of the people who has thought, yes, Switch Pro is real, it's likely coming at some point or another. But there's something to consider here, and I try to talk about this in pretty much most of my videos when it comes down to rumors and things of that nature from Nintendo. Because we're talking about something that hasn't been officially announced yet, it is a project that, even if the information we have is true at the time, it is a project that is in the works, that is fluid. Plans can change, plans can be delayed, plans can be canceled. So because of all these reasons, even if what we're getting is true information, it may only be true at a certain point in time. By the time it becomes ready for the public, it may not be the same thing, or it may never become ready for the public because it is a project that has not officially been announced yet. So it's possible that Bloomberg did get information that Nintendo was planning and working on some 4K capable system, and they made the assumption that it would be a Switch Pro, a revision, and it would come out fairly soon, but those plans changed. And it's obviously now no longer the case, at least for 2021. But people are starting to think that maybe next year, 2022, is when it can maybe happen. And we've talked about on the channel how 2022 is looking to be a very, very strong year for Nintendo. Breath of the Wild 2 is set for 2022, Splatoon 3, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Bayonetta 3. We've also talked about the possibilities of a Metroid Prime remake, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, a new Donkey Kong game, a new Fire Emblem. There's a lot of potential strong releases for next year, and it is suggestive of a lineup similar to 2017 or 2019, somewhere around there. Those were the bigger release years for Nintendo, and what you may find interesting about 2017 and 2019, those are the years we saw Nintendo come out with hardware. Now, for 2021, we're getting Switch OLED. But if you look at the games that are coming out throughout the second half of the year, it's been a game coming out every single month at least, and it's a pretty strong lineup. Is it the best lineup? No, but it's a pretty decent one. So the point I'm getting at here is that while Switch OLED is certainly getting some support with new games, next year is certainly a year that's far bigger, perhaps something comparable to 2017, the biggest, best year for the Nintendo Switch in terms of software releases, and Nintendo could be doing this because they want to support a new piece of hardware to come out during that time. That makes sense, it does, but at the same time, if you look at how Nintendo's been handling the Switch, they're not coming out with a piece of new hardware every single year. They're waiting 2 to 2.5 years, and to think that Nintendo would come out with this Switch OLED, which is more expensive than the other models, only to come out with an even more expensive model just a year later, that seems to go against how Nintendo has been handling things. When you take into consideration that also right now there's a lot of chip shortages and such, can Nintendo really afford to come out with Switch OLED, struggle to meet demand just for that system, just to follow things up by just a year later to come out with a whole other system that is more expensive, that goes against what they've been doing throughout the Switch's life cycle? I'm very skeptical of that at this point. I think Switch OLED is what Nintendo is pushing for the next couple years alongside the other two platforms. So even if what Bloomberg is saying is true, in my opinion, I don't think we're seeing it that soon. It just doesn't seem likely to me. Of course, I could be wrong. Nintendo may very well come out with this Switch Pro 4K next year, and it may turn out to be the case that they're just straight up liars and what they're saying here is wrong. But again, I doubt that because I don't think they would direct something at their investors and just lie to them like that. I don't think that would be the case. Of course, again, some of you will point towards the patent that literally describes the kind of technology we are waiting to see for this supposed Switch Pro 4K. So again, who's telling the truth here? What's going on? This is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that Bloomberg has heard some things, and these things to some extent are true, but you know, there could be some leak bait, there could be a change of plans, there could be some things lost in translation, there could also be a bit of a motive to get a report out there to reclaim some of their credibility, so perhaps, you know, there's a bit more pressure there and maybe they're rushing out an article that may or may not be entirely true. I don't want to make that assumption because I don't know all the full details, but I'm simply suggesting as a possibility because there does seem to be some sort of dispute between Nintendo and Bloomberg here. Something is clearly not entirely accurate. The question is what? So maybe there's some of that going on there. But on the Nintendo side of things, they may have something planned down the pipeline. They can't reveal what that is exactly, but they also can't lie to their investors either. So that's where things get a little confusing. Just to put things out clearly here, at the beginning of this year, Nintendo did not claim that there would not be any Switch revision. They just said they had nothing to announce at this time. And then when we go back to 2020, at the beginning of the year, they said there would be no sort of Switch revisions. So they kept true to their words, and these were words for the investors, not just in some sort of PR interview. I understand there is a history of Nintendo executives or just executives across the board in the gaming industry where they're asked something and they say that's something that's basically ends up turning out to be an entire lie. That's a different situation because they're not speaking to their investors. That's just one PR person stuck in a situation that may not even have all the information, that has to say something and they're not allowed to reveal what they know. When Nintendo's addressing their investors, it's just a different beast. They can't just lie. However, perhaps what Nintendo's doing right now is that, yes, they are working on something with 4K capabilities or higher upscaling resolution technologies. As the patent shows, they clearly are working on that. That is indisputable. Nintendo is working on some sort of artificial intelligence upscaler similar to DLSS. That is a fact because we have their patent that they're actually trying to do something with that. So there's no debate there. But the question is, will that be used, and when will that be used, and will that be used for the Nintendo Switch? That we do not know. So here Nintendo's saying they're not working on anything currently. There's no plans currently for another model of the Nintendo Switch that has 4K capabilities. What if it's not a Nintendo Switch? What if what we're seeing right now is simply evidence towards Nintendo doing research and development for their next generation system. And maybe we don't see that until late 2023 at the earliest. That I can see. That would make sense. And all of a sudden, Nintendo's not lying. Because that would be for, they're saying the Nintendo Switch, right? Maybe we're talking about Switch 2 now. Maybe that's what the patent is for. And maybe this talk of 4K development kits, maybe it's not for a Nintendo Switch. So Zigna's not lying either. And Bloomberg simply is misreporting to some extent here. They are seeing some signs of something, but it's not quite a Switch Pro. It's the next generation Switch, which makes more sense to me. Timing-wise, that makes way more sense. I don't think we're going to see something in 2022, but maybe late 2023 or early 2024, or late 2024. Somewhere around there. Not now. So, that's what I'm thinking. Bloomberg's slightly off, and Nintendo's not revealing the entire truth. It's a gray area here. No one's entirely lying, but no one's entirely telling the truth. As I said earlier, often the truth is somewhere in the middle. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that perhaps everything we're hearing right now is more evidence towards Nintendo's next generation, perhaps a year or two down the road? Or maybe one of these two companies is telling the truth and the other is not? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.